Now, while I'm up topside having the solstice picnic, I want you to be in charge. That means don't let any living down here. Don't mess with the Milwaukee family players. And for the love of all things holy, do not touch the furnace. Got it? Good. Hello. Hello. I have the video for this week. And this week, it's the Solstice Festival. Isn't it? Yeah. We like the Solstice Festival. We got the Solstice Festival. Anyway, this week, we are doing a play called Amadeus. Amadeus is our play. And as usual, before we get started, blah, 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 shop, blah, 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 support, blah, 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 Redbubble, blah, 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 blah. Like, subscribe, comment, share, or I'll jump out from under the bed and scare you witless. Good. Got it? Alrighty. So, our play this week is called Amadeus by Peter Shaffer. Now, Amadeus isn't actually about Amadeus. Amadeus being Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Amadeus is about another composer called Antonio Salieri, an Italian composer of the same period in the same place in the court of Vienna. And the play Amadeus starts with the very elderly Salieri, and the very elderly Salieri is crying out, Mozart, forgive me, I murdered you, blah, blah, blah. And all the people are like, are you hearing this? Is this for real? And so you get this chorus of people whispering about this. They say he's gone mad, he's doing this, he's saying he killed Mozart. But they're not really believing him. We then actually see Salieri, and he has dismissed his servants, and he is evoking the spirits of the future to tell and explain what he did as he sees it. Because this entire play is as he sees it. Not as it necessarily was, but as he understands things to be in his warped little mind. So anyway, we meet Salieri, who comes from a northern Italian town, and at 16 years old, he goes into the church and makes a promise to God. He makes a promise to God, make me a famous composer, make me good enough to appreciate my fame, and I will be blah, 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 blah. It doesn't really matter what he says he'll be, because that's not how it works. But he says this, and lo and behold, the next thing we see is Salieri is in Vienna, which is the center of really that part of the world. It's a big cultural center, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And he is court composer for Emperor Franz Joseph, Marie Antoinette's brother. Yes, the hip, cool court of Vienna. And he is there, and he sits on committees and does all sorts of things. And he's having a wonderful time. He's a famous composer with an important position at court. He is respected. His works are loved. And then a young man whom everybody knows because he got toured around from the age of 3 up until he was no longer a precocious child by his father. Mozart is in Vienna. He has left the Archbishop Prince of Salzburg, who his father is court composer to. Being a composer is a bit like, it's a craft. It's not my artistic vision. It's you learn the craft and then you create music, because, you know, you need music in court because there's no radio and there's no much else. You need music for dinner, otherwise you've got to listen to everyone chewing. And have you been to a dinner where there's nothing to listen to but chewing? Ugh! It's awful. And they need music at court to just, you know, fill the space. So it's very by the numbers music. 18th century court music is very by the numbers. You want something to study to, 18th century court music. Not symphonies. Symphonies are later. Symphonies are a completely different animal. 18th century court music is what you want to study to. It's in the background. It's unobtrusive. It's easy to sort of fill the space, but also not really impose too much on you. It's background music. And so people learned how to compose this stuff. Salieri was also composing operas, which were very well received, these big heroic operas about gods and heroes. You know, we turn up in these operas, big Baroque operas. But he is living at the end of the 18th century, and music at the end of the 18th century has got really formulaic. And that is where this young composer at 25, he comes into Vienna as a guest, having quit his job writing wallpaper music, that his father's like, well, you'll never do anything well because you've quit the good job. What do you think you're going to do? You know. And he's like, nah, I'm going. I understand entirely what it's like to have a smothery parent. And he turns up in Vienna. And he's not exactly the character that Salieri would like to meet. He's young. He's silly. He's lustful. And Salieri is horrified to discover that this silly, lustful, dirty-joked creature crawling around the floor with his fiancée is the composer of the divine music that he hears. Now, that's the effect that the play is supposed to have. My theatre company and my orchestra do not create that, sadly. Sadly, what they create is a cacophony. I should try them out on Shostakovich. No, that probably won't work either. Brecht it is then. Brecht it is. But they don't create the divine music. I don't think it's possible. I could have asked for them to bring me down some musicians, but really, frankly, I've pushed my luck already getting plays. So we're not going to push it further. They renege quicker than Superman changes underpants. I can tell you. Anyway. So Antonio Salieri is utterly horrified to discover this. The emperor, of course, wants to meet Mozart and have him come to court, and they're discussing an opera to commission from him. He's already written a couple of operas. He's written Idomeneo, King of Crete, which is kind of boring, and another one. But the opera that he will actually compose is, and I can't do this in German, The Abduction from the Seraglio. But he comes and he doesn't impress the court because all the old stuffy musicians or people in positions are very, no, but this is how we make music. This is what we do. This is how it is done. It should always be in Italian, and it has to sound like this. Only Salieri can see Mozart and see what he is trying to do and what he is doing, which is take this very formulaic music and crack it to bring something new to it. Of course, people are having problems because it's the shock of the new. The new is always shocking. The new is never easily accepted. And this is sort of what continues through the play. I'm not going to do the entire play blow by blow, because it really is Mozart attempting to bring something new, Salieri recognizing that, and other people being jealous and sort of thwarting him, which results in, Mozart having ill health. He and his wife both didn't have great health. She had 5 children and only 2 of which survived. That's not going to give you great health. Mozart was only one of 2 surviving children. So he was never in really great health anyway. Not from great stock. Not robust stock, let's say. But Mozart is perennially having trouble with money and having marital issues. And Salieri is envious, because Salieri made this deal with God. He made this deal with God: let me be a famous musician. He thought he was making a deal with the ones who took over. That God, the one who threw the thing down the floor and wrecked everything down here, and we had to fix that quickly lest grandfather come out. Yeah, that God. That God doesn't answer prayers like that. You know who does? Us. We do that. We do bargains. And he wanted music. That meant he was asking Apollo. Be careful what you ask for with my brother cousin Polly. My brother cousin Polly has awful bad luck with humans that he gives gifts to. You have to phrase it entirely right. And to be honest, Polly's a bit, he's a bit tetchy with his gifts. Now, he will give them. He will just give them. And that's clearly what Salieri is having issues with, is that Polly has given divine gifts to Mozart. And he has given gifts to Salieri, but not the same gifts. Now, one thing you really don't want to be doing with my brother cousin Polly is ingratitude. He doesn't like ingratitude. None of us really like ingratitude, but my brother cousin Polly has had more than his fair share of ingratitude, and as a result, he's a little bit sensitive. Just a little bit sensitive on that score. So that's something to keep in mind as we move forward. You also don't necessarily want to be touched by the gods against, just out of them being interested in you, because essentially that's what's happening to Mozart. Mozart is being touched by Apollo, being given this divine gift, but it's... Remember when I said Father Uncle Zeus has squish toys? Yeah, it's a little bit overwhelming to have the attention of a god, and Apollo gets so little gratitude that when he does get it, he gets a bit overexcited. Does poor old Polly? And so he sort of will have a tendency, when gratitude is shown, to keep giving And poor little humans are just not really capable of continuing to receive that much from a god. And so they sort of poof very quickly. Salieri had absolutely no need to go and conspire against Mozart. Polly would do it for himself without even realizing that's what he's doing. They're a bit more fragile than we think. So anyway, Salieri grows so resentful of Mozart, so incredibly resentful of Mozart, that he curses God. He curses the God who gave him his enough talent to recognize Mozart, but not enough talent to be Mozart. He wants to speak for the God. That was not in his bargain. He said he wanted fame, and he wanted enough knowledge of music to recognize his fame. And that meant that enough knowledge of music to recognize the gifts of the God. And now, having received all of this, he is now saying, but I want to speak with a God's voice. Are you kidding? You can't do that. Polly's not going to like that. Polly won't like that at all. In fact, we'll see what happens when you go doing that to Polly, because Polly really is never happy about things like that. Very big mistake to upset Polly. So Salieri, in this way, breaks his deal with God. He breaks his deal with God. He is resentful. He no longer keeps his side of the bargain, and he actively works against Mozart, preventing him from taking positions, scandalizing his name, offering him advice and then turning against him, turning others against him to make the advice null and void. He's basically scheming and doing little petty things, including attempting to seduce Mozart's wife. None of these things are real. And eventually Mozart and his shock of the new, and his intemperance with money, and his ability to make enemies of people who don't really appreciate him but do see him as a threat, sort of catch up with him, and he is not well. He's really not well. His wife has gone to the spa because she is also not well, and he is now, he's very sick, and he is being frightened out of his life by the idea of this man who came all dressed in black and commissioned a requiem, and he is now convinced that he is writing his own requiem. This is actually true. There was a nobleman who was going around and stealing composers' works by having them anonymously commissioned and then pretending they were his. It's kind of shady deal. But anyway, he tells Salieri about this man in black, and Salieri dresses up as him and does give him money, but also, is out to scare him to death. So Mozart does die. Salieri thinks, okay, well, now I will be the greatest composer ever. And this is where Polly's nasty sting comes in. Polly had used up Mozart. It's sorry, but they don't last long. Polly used him up. He was on to the next person. Polly is quite Polly, which is why we call him Polly, if you get my drift. Polly has absolutely no fidelity to one individual. Again, I think it's all the constant betrayals. The constant betrayals of Polly lead him to do this. You want fidelity? Don't look at any any of my family. None of my family are faithful. Except my husband. I'm pretty faithful, but nobody makes deals with me. Nobody makes deals with either of us, actually. I don't think they like the idea of what the payment might be. All the others, oh, give me wealth, give me fame, give me fortune, give me love, gimme, 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 and there's no thought of what do you have to pay for that? What is the price of having the God's favour? Because there is always a cost. Always. Even when they love you, there is a cost. Always a cost when you ask the gods a favour. So Salieri, now that Mozart is dead, now that he believes, has gone and consumed and destroyed God's favourite, and in an act of revenge against the God who did not give him what he wanted. Now Polly's punishment comes in. Salieri lives on and on, greatly famous, greatly influential. And he continues to live on and on and on to watch the music that Mozart brought to the table begin to supersede him, to see other composers let jump onto the shoulders of Mozart and not him, to move further and further forward and further away for him until his name is a dim memory as the once great court composer. Salieri, who writes those boring operas. Salieri, who writes that boring music. While Mozart becomes more and more famous and more important and more influential in the history of music because of the very thing that Salieri was forced to recognize, his genius. The very thing that others were envious of. The very thing that challenged everything that they stood for is the thing that gives him his immortality. And so Salieri is telling us this tale. And he tells us that he has been crying out that he killed Mozart because this is his last ditch attempt at immortality. He's going to kill himself, and then everyone will remember him as the man who murdered Mozart. And here is the greatest sting. He doesn't die. And nobody believes a thing that he said about murdering Mozart. He becomes the patron saint of mediocrity. Now, that is what happens when you piss off a god. To be remembered only as a footnote in somebody else's history. To be remembered only as a rumour and a nasty, vindictive rumour at that. To have all your accomplishments forgotten. And not only forgotten, actively dismissed because they are not your rivals. There is the curse that Apollo puts on him. Now, what struck me watching this play is the fact that it is... Now, I don't really worry too much about other people's religions because why would I? But, I have picked up a thing or two. You send an awful lot of people down here. An awful lot of religious wars. There are an awful lot of people who've come down here and attempted to explain why this is wrong and we shouldn't be here. Why it should be someone else. And it's like, oh, sweetie, sweetie. No, that's not what it is. Not how it works. You're wrong. There's always a good laugh hearing what they expected or hearing them complain. This is why nobody asks us for deals. And this is why we're loyal. We don't change. Everybody else is changeable. We're not. We're not. But anyway, what struck me watching this play is that Salieri is and I think this is because it is English. I think this is because it is an English play and not a German play or an Italian play. Salieri is very Milton Satan. It's very interesting how Milton Satan has become the template for villains across so much of English writing since that was written. He is petty and proud and vindictive and angry. He is Milton Satan railing against God. And I think that is quite an interesting thing, because you can then go to our own Mozart and actually see a completely different concept of a rebellion against God. No Satan involved. In Don Giovanni gets dragged down to hell, or rather gets dragged down here, at the end of that opera. Oh, gorgeous piece of music. Absolutely gorgeous piece of music. If you can hear it well. Can't hear it down here. Have to go topside to hear. I have to go topside to hear anything. I'm not going upstairs. Too much bother upstairs. But when I go topside, I do make sure when I'm up for spring, I make sure that I get to go to the operas, I get to go to symphonies, I get to go to plays, I get to go do things, because otherwise I'd never hear a good version, ever. It can be a little disheartening when I come back down here and hear them and see them. But nevertheless, I still do it. Now, Don Giovanni is not angry with God. He's just not doing what he's meant to do. He's just turning away. And I think that's kind of an interesting difference. And I think it's a difference between which I did notice when this play was when looking at this play, is that an English sensibility is an active rebelling against God, a Miltonian Satan, and that is what Salieri does. But Salieri is supposed to be Italian in a Viennese court. Both of these are Catholic. Milton's Satan, and therefore Shaffer's Salieri, is a very Protestant concept of bad, which is, I will oppose you. Whereas a more Italian version, a Catholic version, is, I'm just not going to follow. And it's a very, very, it is a subtle difference, but it was one of the things that really, it actually kind of threw me when I first saw it, because it's like, oh, this isn't very Italian. This is very English. So that element really stood out to me when we looked at the play. The other thing about this play is it's not about Mozart. The Mozart of the play, because Salieri is telling us the story, this is Mozart filtered through Salieri's notion of Mozart, an envy, a vision of envy. Okay, yes, Mozart's letters do have fart jokes. German-speaking cultures love fart jokes. They wrote that to each other. He wrote fart jokes to his mum. He wasn't overly crude. If you are writing fart jokes to your mum, it's just part of the cultural humour. It's not actually that he's this disgusting, grotesque thing with this low sense of humour. That might look like that to the English, but actually culturally, Mozart was a very precociously intelligent, precociously talented child, and an incredibly mature and sophisticated musician as an adult, with a wicked sense of humour. He was able to negotiate a court world that was incredibly sophisticated, even if he did rebel against it to a certain degree, but he wasn't obscene. He knew how to behave to kings and emperors. He'd met more kings and emperors in his day than pretty much anyone else in that court, other than the other kings and emperors. And even then, probably not even them, because kings and emperors generally don't leave their cities. But Mozart had performed for so many all over Europe. So he knew how to behave in court. He wasn't some snivelling idiot, but this is what Salieri wants you to see, because he is seeing why him and not me. This is his envy showing us. Now, the other thing about this play is this play actually revived an element of interest in Mozart. Now, Mozart never 100% went away. But if you look at Anthony Burgess in his book Mozart and the Wolfgang, which is actually narrated by Beethoven, talks about the fact, in his introduction, he talks about the fact that at the beginning of the 20th century, Beethoven was the big name. Beethoven was the serious musician that everybody paid attention to. Mozart was there, but he was not Beethoven. It's no coincidence that he uses Beethoven in A Clockwork Orange. It's not a coincidence at all. Now, this play did, and not only the play, the movie did massively revive people's interest in Mozart. Huge. Because the movie told us Mozart was divine. But Mozart is not necessarily easy to listen to. No classical music is easy to listen to. Beethoven is not easy to listen to. Beethoven is big and noisy and metal music before there was electricity. But it's romantic, and Mozart sits just at the end of the classical, and classical is at the end of the Baroque. The Baroque is really ornate. Most people find Baroque music very off-putting, and you need to work out how to listen to that. Classical music is people like Haydn, like Mozart, people like that. Beethoven sits between the classical and the romantic, and then you get fully romantic, because the early Beethoven symphonies are more classical. Then you get romantic composers like Schubert and Brahms and Berlioz and Wagner, and all the way up to Mahler. So all classical music is not equal, and it doesn't all sound the same, and it does require a level of literacy. But this play reinvigorated people's concept of Mozart, and the idea of Mozart became Mozart is the divine fool, God's fool, which he wasn't, but also that Mozart, it will make you clever. Yes, there was a little bit of a time there when everyone was feeding their babies Mozart. Nice idea, nice thing to get baby to sleep with, won't actually make baby clever. Baby will probably like it, it's probably a good thing to give to baby, but baby, it won't make baby clever. And this, I think, is the curse of immortality. This is the curse of immortality, is your work becomes unmoored from how it is supposed to be, how it was supposed to be created, how it was created. It becomes unmoored, and it becomes used by others for their agendas, and it no longer has necessarily all the meaning that it was initially meant to. But music being abstract, that's easy to do because it doesn't really matter. It's abstract. But when it is a thing that requires a high level of literacy, then it becomes disposable. Because that's probably the worst part of what this play did to Mozart, is raised the profile, but raised it in amongst people for whom the profile and the person meant nothing, and therefore it became disposable. It became a trend. It essentially made Mozart into Salieri, which I don't think was the intention of the play, but it definitely seems to have had that impact. Now, our next play we're going to stick with this making deals with higher powers that may or may not have your best interests in mind. Can you guess? Faust! In fact, we've got two Fausts. I'm not sure if we're going to do them as one play together, like do both versions together, or do them as two separate versions. But in the new year, we are going to do Dr. Faustus by Christopher Marlowe and Faust Part 1, because nobody does Part 2. We're not going to bother with Part 2. Faust Part 1 by Goethe. So, next time I see you, we'll be making some deals with the devil. Have a very happy solstice. And goodbye. If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books and other writing services to help with your writing.